to do it. And
Okay.
I also think that we can pick up these questions and both of us can speak to it.
I
It
think
really
so.
doesn't have to. Let's just do that. That's
And so
easier.
after I speak, I'll ask you what you think, and then we
Okay,
can.
perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
And
Sounds
you're going
good.
to start, right? You're going to
So
start.
you're going to ask me the first question.
Correct, I am. And after
I
you're
will
done, then you can
start, and
say,
I'll pass
perfect,
it over to you.
perfect,
Okay.
perfect,
We know how to
perfect.
dance.
We're just
Yeah.
Yep,
starting.
good.
Hello, everyone. I thank you all on behalf of Team Avatar for being such a wonderful audience. Hope you're having a seamless conference experience. I now invite two powerhouse speakers to share from a leader's perspective the dichotomy of the nature of power that a leader experiences. We have with us Shubha Barry, President of Working Mother Media and an esteemed partner in the US. She oversees Working Mother Magazine, workingmother.com, Diversity Best Practices, the National Association for Female Executives, NAFE, and Culture at Work. Shubha's career spans 30 years of experience in frontline business, operational, and leadership roles where she has built cohesive and productive teams to be agents of change. Hearty welcome to you, Shubha. Our second speaker is Rohini Anand. Dr. Rohini Anand was a former Senior Vice President, Corporate Responsibility, and Global Chief Diversity Officer for Sodexo. She was responsible for the strategic direction, implementation, and alignment of Sodexo's integrated global diversity and inclusion initiatives, as well as Sodexo's corporate social responsibility and wellness strategies. Rohini is a recognized pioneer in her field and is a sought after expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion, executive leadership, human capital, global corporate responsibility, and wellness. It is my pleasure to welcome you both. Over to you, Shubha and Rohini.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us to come speak. And when Saundarya originally spoke to me, I thought about, what is even better than the power of one or I is the power of two or we. And so I know you've heard many amazing speakers share their perspectives about the power that an individual has, the power that each one of us has within us. So I am delighted to kick off this conversation by asking my dear friend Rohini, what does power mean to you, Rohini? And have you sort of morphed and changed how you've expressed your power, and how do you think it is perceived generally within our society, and how you've adapted to make your own personal brand of who you are, appear and come across as powerful and impactful?
Wonderful, Shubha. Thank you also. And I'm sure this conference has been so inspiring for all of you. For me, the cherry on the cake, Shubha, is to actually do this with you. So
Oh,
thank you for inviting me, because I always learn a lot from you. And I think that, we were just talking before the session that we know how to dance, right? We know how to do this together. So I'm very, very happy to be here. So I think, that's a really interesting question that you asked. Because to me, I think power is, first of all, I would say that power is very situational. So it can be derived from position or title. And your second question was sort of how have I morphed, right? So I'm going to combine these answers together. So perhaps at one time when I was younger, many years ago, it may have been position or title. But I've learned very quickly that, one way of expressing that power is a power that comes from within an individual. So it's the personal power, right? Which I think that what this conference has really been about. But even then, to me, Shubha, that personal or individual power doesn't come from control, right? It comes from being authentic. It comes from being really admitting what you don't know, from being vulnerable. It's about being open to growth. So that individual power is being open to growth. It comes from a sense of humility that you don't have all the answers. And I think it was Richard Daley, once he was a politician, who said that he said that power is dangerous unless you have humility. And I think that's really important. Even that power of the individual is dangerous unless there's that sense of humility in terms of not knowing what you don't know, not having all the answers. And then I think apart from the power of the individual and what you do with that power, right, there's also the power of the collective. So to me, that's about creating the conditions to mobilize passion, to unleash potential in others. It's about lifting others up. It's about paying it forward. But I think the most important aspect of power is relational power. And I think that sort of exists only in relationship to others. So that's the power of collaboration as a source of power. And I think that the clearly the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So, and I think you've demonstrated that in sort of this conversation, the two of us doing it together. And ultimately, I think it's when you have that sort of all those aspects of power, the collective, the relational, also the individual, the self-reflection, when it comes together, then I think it's really sort of the most effective power. And, I think there's an African saying that goes, to go fast, you go alone. To go far, you go together. And I think that's what, it's sort of bringing this all together in terms of really uplifting people. And to your question about sort of how have I made it my own, and how have I kind of morphed this power, I think for me the most effective expression of my power has been enabling others, creating an enabling environment, lifting others up. And I think it's with that others have sort of turned to me. They've come to me for solutions. It's not because it's been something that I've said, I report to the CEO and therefore you have to, or I'm more senior than you. But it's creating that environment where you are lifting others up. So they turn to you, and that's what gives you power. And I think that's sort of where I have landed in terms of my expression of power. But I'm going to stop there because I know you have a lot to say on this topic, and I want to make sure that I ask you as well. What does power mean to you? And I know that you have very often experienced internal struggles and have had to exercise your power as a leader, especially in these sort of current times. So can you speak to what power means to you, and then how you have had to the internal struggles that you've experienced in expressing power during the current times?
It's always so wonderful to have a conversation with you, and then we get to do it for our wonderful partners Avtar in India. So thank you again. You mentioned certain things, the authenticity, the humility that has to accompany it to build those relationships. And one of the things I always think about is that growing up, I always thought power had very male attributes.
Mm-hmm.
This notion of command and control. And very often society looks at someone who is powerful as someone who's a commander in chief. And yet, in this current circumstance, when you think about what power is, whether it's looking at the countries in the world that best handled COVID as an example, do you know how many of them are led by women leaders?
Mm-hmm.
And so what that tells me is that there is another side to what being powerful is all about, and that is about compassion, inclusion, and like you said, humility, vulnerability, cohesion, consensus building, all of the things that go into bringing the collective together, but yet knowing how to be decisive to then lead with what is best for that given circumstance. So I think that power is a quiet confidence that you can exude that comes from drawing from things within you and from things around you. Things within you could be your humility, your ability to be vulnerable and yet courageous. And I always think sometimes power comes with speech and sometimes power comes with silence.
Good
And I think
point.
that those are, if you remember our parents when we were growing up, sometimes it was the long deep stares and the silence that gave us a much more powerful message than the loud words or the anger. So I think about powerful as, just like you do, as a combination of the individual and the collective, and knowing what to pull out when is what makes it, that judgment, that ability to hold back and yet leap forward, and knowing what to do when is what makes you truly powerful.
So
And in
Shiva,
the current in the current
right? Yeah, talk
circumstance,
about
I will
yeah.
tell you that it has been hard, because to consensus build you have to listen to everyone's opinion, and yet there may not be a clear 70-30 decision. You have to then decide. When it's 50-50, you still have to decide where you move forward with. And at that moment in time, what you need is courage.
Mm,
As a leader, you need to find your courage and your sense of judgment, knowing that there's about a third of a chance that you're going to fail, knowing
mhm.
what you will do when you fail, because without failure there is no learning, as you well know through your journey.
Yeah, I think great points. I think you're absolutely right. I think, this sort of at this time, I think sort of being a leader and drawing on that power in a way that is compassionate, that's caring, where people trust you, but still making those tough, hard decisions is absolutely is necessary, because, I think these times are unique times that are calling on us to make very tough choices and tough decisions. So you're absolutely, spot on that. And I think go ahead. Going to say
No, I was
something?
I was going to say, in this environment, we're all facing adversity. There is no clear right and wrong answer
Right,
sometimes.
right.
Uh, you know that you lead with what the right decision is, and there is a toll to pay for that. And as a leader during environments like this, when there isn't a clear cut win-win,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you then engage compassion in circumstances like these? Talk a little bit about the role of compassion during times like these.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of, leaders have at various points in their journey had to make some very, very tough decisions, whether it is, right sizing at this time of COVID, whether it is making decisions about your workforce. These are not easy decisions, and leaders have the power to make those decisions and have to be consistent and fair in that decision making, but really have to be very compassionate, have to ensure that, there is a sense of trust as you're making those decisions, and a caring for people. So even as you have to make decisions about, maybe downsizing or furloughing, which, we've all had to do, particularly at these times, it's still ensuring that they know that you do care, that you're going to help them land, that, you care for them as whole people, and that you're going to support them as they move forward. So on the one hand, yes, you have to make those decisions sometimes for the business, but on the other hand, there's a lot you can do. Check in all the time with individuals if you've had to make these tough decisions. Help them to land the next job. Be there as a reference. Support them through the transition. I think those are the things that, these are relationships built over a long period of time. It's trust built over a long period of time. And when you make some of those decisions, sometimes it's perceived as, that they may not trust you. But I think there's a way of doing it where you really are shepherding somebody and caring for them as a whole person while making these tough decisions. And it's not easy. I mean, I know I've stayed up night after night when I've had to make these decisions, because, sometimes, people have, families to support. But I've gone into it with a sense of consistency and fairness, because I know I'm doing the right thing for the business, which is my first priority. And second, as I've often said to them, look, there's something better out there and I'll help you to get there. And I think that combination is really important, even as you make some of those, very, very difficult decisions. So I know, Shubha, that you've sort of had to make these decisions, but also I think you've taken many risks. I think you've challenged norms, and you've used your power in a very effective way. A, when you've had to make these tough decisions, and B, when you've had to challenge norms. Can you speak a little bit to that?
It's interesting. And as you were talking about that compassion as a leader, I was reminded actually of a law firm that I know where they decided, rank and file, that everybody would take a pay cut, including some of the sort of senior most leaders taking enormous pay cuts so that everyone could still stay employed. This is during these COVID times when
Mm-hmm.
business literally ground to a standstill. So, that kind of ability to look at the impact on the broader organization and as a leader help drive and make decisions that feels right for your organization's culture is really also exhibiting and exuding
Yeah,
power. So
absolutely.
you asked me about risk taking and challenging norms. I have to tell you, I will candidly say sometimes I was foolhardy, sometimes I was lucky, but often I drew upon my life's experiences. In this
Mm-hmm.
journey, you've made decisions that sometimes leads to success and sometimes failure. And during tough times, you draw from those. You draw from consulting with people that you trust and that you respect, whose opinions can also help guide your thought process. Sometimes I convinced people that they needed to join me in this, but that required a certain amount of selling the
Mm-hmm.
idea to them. Sometimes it was talking down the naysayers. Sometimes it is standing up to say, I know you feel that way, I respect that, but I don't think you're right this time. I really believe that we can come out of this differently. But always finding a way to put one foot in front of the other and keep moving. Because
Mm-hmm.
staying in place, doing nothing, is not an option. And sometimes during times of crises, the options look so poor that you are tempted often to just say, let me stay put. If I just wait long enough, it's like saying, if I hold my breath long enough, suddenly things will change. And they never do. They never do. They bring you to a place that you may not want to be at. So I'd say sometimes I went around, sometimes I went over, sometimes I went under, sometimes I had to walk through the fire. But whatever it was, you do that with a great deal of drawing on your own convictions and sound judgment and leaning on other people. A
Mm-hmm.
very wise person once said to me, during times of crisis, learn to lean on others, because when you lean on others, you give them permission to lean back on you. And it's one of those things where it's almost foolhardy to say, I'm going to do this alone. I will make this decision all on my own. So when you think about um, you know leading diversity, we often talk, you and I, that in times of crisis, do you think it's easier or more difficult to be leading more diverse team? Because we often are called upon to question the pros and cons of homogeneity versus diversity. And right now, the big focus is on let's have diverse teams. But during times of crisis, during moments like what we faced in these last 5 months or so, what do you think about that notion of leading a diverse workforce, diverse teams? What is called upon from a leader during these times?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Shubha. And I would say that on the one hand, I think diverse teams are really the answer to times of crisis, because I think that they can spawn very creative ideas that help to bring us out of these times of crises. I think if they've been enabled in an environment that is nurturing, where there is a sense of belonging, I think those answers can emerge. And I think we're seeing that in many organizations, how they're coming up with creative solutions. That's not coming from the top. Those solutions of pivoting during times of crisis is not coming from the top. It's coming from the operators who are there on the ground, who see the business, who are often women and people of color, minorities and others, who are coming up with solutions, and I think that sort of how you define minority obviously differs depending on where you are and which part of the world. But regardless of where you are, it's people on the ground who are coming up with solutions. So I think managing a diverse teams at this time is the solution. However, having said that, I will tell you that, there are many challenges, and there's no right or wrong, right? In terms of how people present themselves, it's just different. And understanding the context and a different worldview is what makes it easier to manage a diverse workforce. And I will say for myself, some of it is understanding myself and my own hot buttons. So, I can tell you that I worked for many years for a French company, and conversations that I would have with them at meetings would be circular conversations. And they'd go on, and there'd be everyone sort of pontificating, philosophizing. Everyone had to have way in. It took forever. And here I am, having lived in the US for as many decades as I have, coming in and saying, let's get to the solution. We need the next steps. And I learned afterwards that I was so task oriented that I just had a hard time letting go. And I had to step back and say, there's something beautiful in what they're trying to do, because everyone has an input. All voices are heard. That's how they're educated. And, for me to step back and say, okay, it may take time, but this is how relationships are built. This is how they get to know each other. This is how they trust each other. And then the outcome is something that everyone's bought into. So I think, doing that, managing in a way where you sort of create an enabling environment, but where you self-reflect, know your own hot buttons and flex your style. But having, again, I think in this virtual environment, Shubha, it is very challenging to give feedback, build trust virtually. But, I think the way to do that is obviously to be there for your teams, to coach them, to guide them, to be available for them, to support them so that they trust you. And you said this at the onset as well as, I mentioned in terms of being vulnerable, right? You have to admit that you don't have all the answers, that we're all human, but at the same time, being consistent and clear about your expectations. A deadline is a deadline, and let's be clear about it. But at the same time, I'm willing to flex. You have other circumstances, so let's talk about it. But all that happens with the foundation of trust, and you have to try that much harder when you're remote and unable to sort of see people face to face. I call this whole thing about leadership and power a loose but tight model, right? You have to be consistent and fair, but at the same time, you have to be able to go with the flow. So, to me, it's that loose but tight model. I know that we're sort of running out of
Do you
time.
want to go to some of the questions? I know
Yeah,
we could talk forever.
I'm
You and
going to
I could
ask
talk
you.
forever.
I'm going to ask you a question about your resilience, because
Okay.
you do have this sort of incredible resilience, and it sort of emerges from within you, and you've developed it over time. And more importantly, I think you've sustained your resilience. Speak to us about how you've done that, because I think there's a lot that we can all learn from that.
So I think that we all grow up thinking, I'm charting my path for my home and my family. I've got this pathway I'm going to take for my work and career. This is the pathway. And you sort of, if you are ambitious, and I know I am, and I have always been ambitious, that you chart that path. And then when the first thing starts to go wrong, and then the second, and then the third, you begin to realize that your best laid plans can only take you yay so far. Not everything conspires to help you. So I always say to myself, it was actually most of you, if I don't know if you've heard me speak at the Avatar conferences, I have shared that I'm a 6-time cancer survivor. Health issues, health challenges will bring you to your knees in a way that you begin to realize that you have so little control over so much that happens to you. And that, in my mind, was the beginning of my resilience journey, knowing that, you know, failures ultimately just bring you one step closer to that success. So I would say to you, repeated failing and rising up to the next challenge teaches you A, that you can, B, that if you take your life as a continuum of a certain amount of successes and failures, if you face more failures in the beginning, all you have is successes more towards the end. So it builds a kind of optimism. And I began to take each experience as a lesson to be learned. And in that lesson, whether or not I succeeded or failed, there was still a lesson to be learned. And therein lay sort of the core of how I built my resilience. And I already spoke about how I learned to lean on others. I learned that I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to be bold, brave, making it on my own. This notion of, I know that I grew up in a culture where, parents used to always say, well, I'm not going to put in a word for you because guess what? I want you to sink or swim on your own. I've completely come, 180 degrees the other way, where I feel, whether it's as parents, as colleagues, as leaders, as managers, we need to say, wherever, however I can lend a hand and lift someone, I will do it. I will do it continually. Because guess what? That, in my opinion, feeds a virtuous cycle of giving and receiving in this world that we could all use a little bit more of.
Yeah,
So I
awesome.
don't
So
know if that gives you
it does. And so I'm going to segue to, another question, which sort of, as you're speaking, made me realize, you have this sort of boundless energy, right? So along with resilience, this sort of comes across in all your encounters. So how do you sustain your energy?
Well, I'll start off by saying I don't focus on the bad stuff. So sometimes my siblings will remind me of something that happened in our childhood, and I have no recollection of it. So that is a gift, that I don't remember the bad stuff. And when you don't remember the bad stuff, guess what's left? It's all your positive experiences, so that can build optimism. And the other piece, you talked about it early, this notion of helping others, lifting others, supporting others. There is such great positivity, energy, and joy that comes from every single one of those actions, small and big, that you do. And I remember when I was at Merrill Lynch, I walk into the cafeteria one day, and the CEO, who always used to come to the cafeteria, had given the checkout clerk at the cafeteria, I think $500, and said, cover as many people as this will cover. So when I got to the counter, she said, your lunch is on Lonnie Steffens today. And I thought to myself, my God, I was a rookie, I was a newcomer. And of course, I remember looking at my plate and saying, geez, I wish I had taken some more things. But anyway, but the reality was that small act of kindness had put a smile on my face. And after all these years, I still remember it. So don't underestimate the power of the things that you do. The other thing is, Rohini, I believe in a theory that says abundance, abundance, abundance. And what I mean by that is, I believe that we are surrounded by an abundance of everything, and that we are all completely deserving of that abundance. And so I think each and every one of us, our collective power of tapping into that notion of abundance means there is no reason for us to have a scarcity mentality. If I get the promotion, doesn't mean she or he can't. If I win something, doesn't mean he or she can't. So if you believe in abundance, then you will really live your life with this sense of optimism and gratitude. And I drive and derive so much of my power and energy from believing in that really deeply.
It's awesome. That's wonderful. Yeah, I think, as you were talking about lifting others up, I was just thinking, someone asked me just yesterday, an old colleague of mine, she said, you've retired. It must be wonderful. You've retired from Sodexo. You have so much time. And I sort of said to her, I said, apart from all the boards that I'm on and the writing that I'm doing and the consulting that I'm doing, the speaking I'm doing, a majority of my time I actually spend on basically, helping others, coaching others to, when they're stuck and when they have a need for some advice. but also just supporting others with, crisis that they're going through, jobs that they want, that, helping them interview for jobs, providing them with job leads. And, I don't know how to say no, but I think that really is a source of power, the source of power being, creating that enabling environment. And you spoke to the fact of abundance, really sort of lifting others up, ensuring that, you are helping others, because, I firmly believe that power is not about control. It is about being grounded in yourself, being sure about who you are, what your values are, what you're not willing to compromise on, but then surrounding yourself with people that you have supported and who in turn, when you need, will be able to lift you up. So power, to me, is the ability to do good things for others. It really is. That, to me, is what power is about, is the ability to do good things for others, because then that is what gives you that, relational power that I talked about. So I'm
Well, I
wondering,
love it because
Shiva.
you put a bow on our conversation. I just really love the way you sort of wrap that up with a nice bow at the end. You are right. This is about doing for others, and and as I said, believing in the notion of abundance, where some of it will find its way back to you. And I always say that being Indian and being Hindu helps me, because this notion of karma reminds me constantly that all the good and the not so good that I do finds its way back to me. Let's
Shubha and
try to look at the
Rohini.
questions.
David,
Yes.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Nisha.
Yeah, so
I
we have a question from Sushma who says, how different is the DNA agenda for India versus other countries, especially where there are diverse cultures involved?
Yeah. So I think, this is one of those things where you're absolutely right. I think the agenda in India and the focus on India is different than other parts of the world. I think most organizations are still basically focused on gender when it comes to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in India. And I think even that shows up very differently. I'll give you one very quick story, which, so what I often say is that I think individuals from the West take their Western mindset, and very often those from the US diversity practitioners will take a civil rights mindset to the work that's being done outside of the US and in India as well. So, they might say, well, we see issues of race, regardless of what part of the world we're talking about. And I don't think that necessarily translates. So it has to be very contextual. And the example that I will give you is when you talk about gender in India. I grew up in Bombay, in Mumbai, and I came to the US to go to graduate school, thinking that I knew what there was to know about, the context where I grew up. When I went back to do work with Sodexo, I sat with some of the entry level women managers, and I had in my head a notion that, women in India, we needed to put in mentoring, leadership development, etc. And I was met with a lot of silence. So then ultimately I asked, these women, I said, what is it that will help you? And one of the women in the audience said to me, she said, ma'am, if we work late, we have to go home. We can't work late because we have to go home. We have to take care of the cooking. We have to take care of our in-laws, the house. And so we can't work on some of these projects that are very interesting. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, I had, that notion of joint family is something that I had, the context I had, I had forgotten. Or not forgotten, but I didn't realize what an impact it could have. And so and secondly, I'm thinking to myself, now, what am I going to do about this? What solution can we come up with for this? So I asked them again, and this goes back to power and empowering others, right? I asked them, I said, how can we help you? And they came up with a solution. They said, have a day of awards at the office. And can you invite our families also? So we did that. We had this recognition day where we recognized all the women, their families were there, and they were so proud of these women. And, it may not have, reduced the burden entirely, but it changed some of the dynamics. So I share that story to share that a lot of the work we do has to be contextualized. And in India, there are, there's still issues around gender, many issues around gender. But then, of course, you have other issues, certainly disabilities, LGBT, which, cut across, but also issues of religion. And, so I think what needs to happen is to look at it within that context, within the organizational culture and the culture of the country, and come up with solutions that make sense. So I know that most companies still focus on gender, but also on disabilities and LGBT. Some of the other areas are not as prevalent in terms of diversity strategies in India as I think we should get to. I know with Black Lives Matter, issues of color and colorism are now surfacing in different parts of the world, but are showing up differently. So I'll just stop there. I hope that answers the question, because I know there are many more questions here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rohini. Shubha, would you like to answer the next question, which is from Pavani? She says how important it is to have open conversations with shop floor employees to indulge in idea generation.
It's a great question. She refers to shop floor, but what is she's talking about is this notion of great ideas can come from any level. And what is interesting to me is if you create a forum or a conduit by which you encourage everybody in the organization to ideate, to say that ideas don't just have to come from somebody with a certain title or a certain corner office, but rather from anyone who sees an issue or a problem and has a creative way to solve for it. And I'm going to say to you that this next generation expects that. They are far less hierarchical, even in India, than the previous generation. So I think if you really want to be a magnet for attracting the best talent to your organization, you better start to find a way where you become open to listening to these ideas up, down, and across the organization. Truly, genuinely, deeply listening, not just indulging in it, but committing to listen to those voices and acting on the good ideas. I think it's a very powerful tool. And when you talk about the power of innovation that is derived from having diversity of perspectives, this is one of the best examples that I think you can share.
Thank you so much, Shubha. Rohini, anything you would like to add on to this?
No, I think we can go to the next question.
Okay, so the next question is from Agilan Deshwari, who says, how do you handle power conflicts from peers? And we would like to hear about this from both of you.
Okay. You want to go, Shubha, and then I can.
Sure, sure. This is where, especially in an organization where everybody is trying to position themselves to seem as the one that's coming up with the great idea or the solution and so on, it becomes almost a little bit of a battle for whose idea is better. And I'm going to say to you, the ability for you to switch gears and go from being this competitor who's trying to sort of strong arm your idea into the forefront to be adopted. How about if you truly genuinely think that the other idea is worthy of support and merits your support? Step up and do that. Your power in that moment will come from actually supporting someone else's great idea, not figuring out how to arm wrestle your idea in. So I say to you, usually in meetings when people are talking, how much time do we spend listening intently to the other person? And how much time do we spend intently thinking about what is it, the idea that we're going to put on? I remember early in my career, I used to actually write down things I was going to say. And in that moment, when I was writing down things I was going to say at the meeting, I was not listening to what somebody else was saying. So I'm going to say to you, start to really build that muscle that listens deeply, that supports good ideas. And then as a leader, find the way to bring in people who may not be speaking up as much to say, what do you think about it? What idea do you have? And that is sort of creating that kind of leadership, makes space for everyone to contribute their thoughts and ideas. Rohini?
Yeah, Shubha, I think as you were talking, Nisha asked earlier, do you have anything to add to the question? And I was busy reading the questions in the chat so that I actually missed some of the nuances in your response. So I'm owning that because you're absolutely right. That's exactly what happens, when you're not listening, that's exactly what happens. And that's what I did. So I'm owning that and apologizing for it. But I will say that, in terms of peer, peer power, I think this notion of being an ally is such an important one. I think that you can change a dynamic in terms of how you respond, and you can take the power within by responding in a way that is above pettiness and conflict. So I think it's how you reshape the conversation, how you change the dialogue, how you come across as being a support for the other person. And I think making space for the other person, which in turn comes back and reflects right back on you in a very positive way. So I think it's reframing that conflict. So it's not seen as a conflict. If there is sort of two different notions of how to get something done, it's sort of acknowledging and building on. It's reframing what you're doing. So, the question that you ask is a little contextual. So we're both responding as though there are two ideas, and those ideas are competing, but there may be sort of other situations. And I would just say reframe that in a way that it becomes a win-win, so that you get what you want, but you get it in a way that the other person actually feels that they're being validated and acknowledged, while you're reframing that. So I think there's a trick in terms of doing that, but some of it has to do with coming out of your own self and saying, what's in it for the other person? What is making the other person tick? Why are they behaving in this way? And then reframing what you want to really kind of help them to get that. And in turn, it will support you and get you what you need. So.
Rohini,
Allow
can I say that in the moment you actually modeled the behavior of how to be vulnerable? I love that. And yes, Rohini and I are good friends and I adore her, but the ability for her in this forum to be vulnerable enough to admit what she did, that is really what I'm talking. That is power, guys. That is power.
And let me say, when you acknowledge that and validate it, see how the power shifts in terms of how, the power reflects back on you. So this is exactly the kind of modeling I think that was not staged, it was not rehearsed, but I think you did a good job.
any closing remarks from both of you? Final thoughts and closing remarks?
Go ahead, Shubha. You were almost about to say something. Go ahead.
So I would just say, these are really tough, difficult times, and I would urge you that in the midst of, work seems endless, demands on home seem endless, and we really don't get to see, more than a close, small group of people that we maybe live with day to day. That is the reality, no matter where you are in the world. And I'm going to say to you, take some time for yourself. I don't care if it is 15 minutes. Start to find some ritual. Some people can meditate. Other people can just, maybe you have a book of some inspirational messages and sayings, read a few pages of it. Maybe just, close your eyes and listen to the sounds of nature. Whatever it is that you can do, develop some kind of ritual for yourself, because sooner than later there will be a vaccine. We will come out of this, but let us make this time that we have experienced these last months be something that actually energize and inform us for what the rest of our lives are going to be. And I wish you all the abundance and blessings in the world. I hope they surround you and keep you well.
That's beautiful, Shubha. Absolutely beautiful. I would say, I think echoing what you said in terms of really touching base, grounding yourself, making sure that you have that strength within you, because this is going to be for the long haul, and you do need to take care of yourself. you first need to take care of yourself. So make sure you touch base, you're grounded, you do things that really sort of revitalize and rejuvenate you, however brief that might be. But also remember there are others out there who have more of a need than you do as well. So make sure you're there for others, you care for others, you express that caring, you lift others up, and you share, because there are people that are going through some very, very difficult and challenging times, both physically as well as from a mental health perspective. So take care of yourselves, take care of those around you, be there for others, because again, this will all reflect back on you. This is going to end. And I think we'll all come out stronger, sharper, more creative at the other end, even though it may not seem that way. But, sort of the time will come. And I think in the meantime, let's make the best in a very positive way of even what we have in front of us. So thank you all. And be well, stay well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shubha and Rohini. That was absolutely delightful. Thank you so much once again for giving us these powerful and wonderful and absolutely delightful takeaways and insights. We now request all delegates to go back to the agenda page in the virtual conference platform. On the agenda tab, click on the join session tab below the closing address. Thank you so much once again. Thank you so much once again, Shubha and Rohini.
Thank you.
Thank you.